6:02 a.m. John F. Kennedy International Airport, Terminal 3. Cold wind hissed through the glass seams as the woman stepped into the first-class lounge. A long, gray wool coat fell below her knees, its collar turned up to cover most of an amber silk scarf. She wasn't carrying a Louis Vuitton bag, nor a gleaming silver Rimowa suitcase, just an old canvas suitcase, its wheels squeaking with each step. She pulled it toward the business-class check-in counter. A young attendant in a crisp uniform with a textbook smile looked up, then paused for a second. Her gaze wasn't welcoming. It was the look one gives an out-of-place item on a luxury shelf. "I'm sorry, the economy check-in is over there, near the Starbucks." The woman raised her head. Her voice was light, steady, and firm. "I'm flying seat 1A. You might want to double-check." A brief silence, a furrowed brow. Then the smile returned, thinner now, more forced. Her name was Ruth Delaney. Age, 72. Achievements, founder of the largest scholarship fund in the U.S. for black students. Once gave a speech at the United Nations. Once turned down a Nobel Peace Prize nomination with the words, "I don't need a title to do what's right." And today, she just wanted to go home. The final flight of a career that spanned more than 40 years. But no one in the lounge recognized her. No one bothered to look. A middle-aged man in an Armani suit nearby glanced over and frowned. Honestly, can't they maintain first-class standards? Looks like she wandered in off a bus. He didn't whisper. He said it to be heard, and they heard. A few people smiled. No one objected. The attendant checked the ticket. It was indeed seat 1A, but instead of apologizing, she said, "Please wait over there. I need to confirm with the system." The other waiting area had no leather seats, no champagne, only cold plastic chairs and a vending machine hummed in the background. Mrs. Delaney sat there, back straight, hands resting neatly on her lap. Each time a new passenger arrived, the staff bowed, smiled, helped with luggage, and poured water. No one approached her, not a single glance. It wasn't rejection, it was erasure, the feeling of being edited out of the frame. If you've ever been in a room where everyone pretended you didn't exist, you might find parts of this story familiar. If that feeling once silenced your voice, even when you wanted to scream, don't hesitate to share your thoughts below. We read every word, and we believe your voice deserves to be heard. At 7:10, another staff member arrived, an older man in a tailored suit. He looked at her, took her ticket, checked it, and said, "Ah, yes, here it is. Apologies for the mix-up. Please follow me." But the tone lacked sincerity. It was an apology, issued by protocol. Mrs. Delaney said nothing. She just nodded. First-class cabin, seat 1A. The man in the Armani suit from earlier saw her, stunned. He let out a half laugh, murmuring to the woman next to him, "Unbelievable. They're letting just anyone buy these tickets now?" A young woman sighed. "It's not their fault. The problem is money's too easy to make these days." The chief flight attendant leaned in and quietly said, "If you'd prefer, we can find a quieter seat toward the back. Some passengers are feeling uncomfortable." Ruth turned, looked her straight in the eye, and for the first time she spoke. "They're not uncomfortable. They can't handle someone like me sitting beside them. That's a different issue. If this story sparks even the faintest urge in you to resist, we invite you to follow Ruth's journey. This story isn't just hers. It belongs to everyone who's ever been told, 'You don't belong here.' And if you believe there are stories still untold, you can follow this journey by simply subscribing. It's a small act, but sometimes even a silent follow is enough to make the world listen." Ruth Delaney placed her bag on her lap and opened an old leather notebook. No one noticed that inside was the signed contract finalizing the acquisition of the airline's shares. Signed just last night. No one knew she was the newly appointed chair of the board. No one asked. And she didn't say a word. Seat 1A wasn't the most luxurious seat on the plane. It didn't recline into a full bed. It didn't have a 17-inch private screen. But it sat right beside the cockpit, and closest to the attention of the lead flight attendant. When Ruth Delaney took her seat, she placed the old canvas suitcase beneath her feet, removed her silk scarf, and folded it neatly into a triangle. Every movement was slow, precise. The lead attendant, a young woman named Alyssa, leaned in once more, speaking softly. "I just want to make sure. If there's anything bothering you, we can rearrange your seat." The air around them thickened. The man in seat 1B, the one in the Armani suit, turned his head toward the window, as if refusing to share space with reality. The woman in 1C glanced sideways, then pretended to read a fashion magazine. "I'm fine," Ruth replied, "but thank you." Alyssa hesitated one more second, then walked away. As soon as she was out of sight, the man beside Ruth spoke. "You know," he said, not looking directly at her, "no one's saying you don't belong here. It's just, some places have standards." "And what are those standards?" Ruth asked. He paused. It seemed he didn't expect a reply. He shrugged. "Courtesy, sophistication, class, not canvas bags and soft-soled shoes." The engines began to hum. The plane taxied onto the runway. A young couple seated behind them stifled giggles at the exchange. The sound was faint, but sharp enough to slice through polite distance. Ruth turned her head slightly, not angry, not sad, just a calm stillness in her eyes, as though she had heard those words hundreds of times before, and had placed them in a full drawer of memory. The seatbelt sign lit up, the plane lifted off. The cabin trembled gently during the first few seconds. Then came silence, but not peace. Alyssa returned, pushing the cart with premium champagne. When she reached the front row, she poured the first glass for seat 1B, the man in the Armani suit. He raised his glass with a smile, still not looking at Ruth. When it was Ruth's turn, Alyssa hesitated. "What can I get you, ma'am?" "Water," Ruth said. "Water?" Alyssa echoed, slightly puzzled. "Yes, spring water." Alyssa poured a glass. Her hand trembled slightly. As she handed it to Ruth, she avoided eye contact. Ruth accepted it and spoke gently. "I know you're doing your job. And I know you don't get to choose who flies with whom." Alyssa exhaled. Her cheeks flushed. "But you do get to choose how you treat people, even when everyone around you chooses wrongly." In the center of the cabin, warm yellow light filtered softly through the double windows. The woman in seat 1C, the one who had pretended to read a magazine, finally spoke. "I'm sorry if we made you feel uncomfortable. But you have to understand that these seats are part of an exclusive experience. And when someone walks in who doesn't look like the usual, it throws things off balance." Ruth placed her glass down on the tray table. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. Privilege isn't in the seat. It's in the mind. A seat doesn't know who sits on it. Only people do that. From the economy cabin behind, a soft sound rang out, a child's laughter. It cut through the tension in first class like a breeze. Everyone heard it. No one said a word. Perhaps each of them was silently wondering what made the child laugh. After lunch, as the cabin lights dimmed to a soft blue for rest mode, Ruth pulled out a letter from her suitcase. An ivory envelope written in elegant handwriting. On the front, "Open only when the final flight begins." Ruth carefully opened it and read. Her expression didn't change, but her breaths grew deeper, longer. A young intern, seated in the far back of the economy cabin, happened to see her through the curtain gap. She didn't know who Ruth was, but something about the woman made her heart skip a beat. Perhaps you've once sat somewhere, in a fancy room, a formal event or a plane like this, and realized every glance passed right through you. No one asked how you were feeling. No one believed you deserved to be there. If that feeling has ever brushed past your life, don't hesitate to share. Your stories aren't just memories. They are scars many others still try to hide. The cabin lights dimmed further. Most passengers were asleep or wore headphones. Ruth remained upright. She didn't sleep. She didn't close her eyes. Her fingers gently touched the ring on her little finger, engraved with the words, "Never loud. Always heard." Seat 1A wasn't the most luxurious seat on the plane. It didn't recline into a full bed. It didn't have a 17-inch private screen, but it sat right beside the cockpit and closest to the attention of the lead flight attendant. When Ruth Delaney took her seat, she placed the old canvas suitcase beneath her feet, removed her silk scarf, and folded it neatly into a triangle. Every movement was slow, precise. The lead attendant, a young woman named Alyssa, leaned in once more, speaking softly. "I just want to make sure. If there's anything bothering you, we can rearrange your seat." The air around them thickened. The man in seat 1B, the one in the Armani suit, turned his head toward the window, as if refusing to share space with reality. The woman in 1C glanced sideways, then pretended to read a fashion magazine. "I'm fine," Ruth replied. "But thank you." Alyssa hesitated one more second, then walked away. As soon as she was out of sight, the man beside Ruth spoke. "You know," he said, not looking directly at her. "No one's saying you don't belong here. It's just some places have standards." "And what are those standards?" Ruth asked. He paused. It seemed he didn't expect a reply. He shrugged. "Courtesy, sophistication, class, not canvas bags and soft-soled shoes." The engines began to hum. The plane taxied onto the runway. A young couple seated behind them stifled giggles at the exchange. The sound was faint, but sharp enough to slice through polite distance. Ruth turned her head slightly, not angry, not sad, just a calm stillness in her eyes, as though she had heard those words hundreds of times before, and had placed them in a full drawer of memory. The seatbelt sign lit up. The plane lifted off. The cabin trembled gently during the first few seconds. Then came silence, but not peace. Alyssa returned, pushing the cart with premium champagne. When she reached the front row, she poured the first glass for seat 1B, the man in the Armani suit. He raised his glass with a smile, still not looking at Ruth. When it was Ruth's turn, Alyssa hesitated. "What can I get you, ma'am?" "Water," Ruth said. "Water?" Alyssa echoed, slightly puzzled. "Yes, spring water." Alyssa poured a glass. Her hand trembled slightly. As she handed it to Ruth, she avoided eye contact. Ruth accepted it and spoke gently. "I know you're doing your job, and I know you don't get to choose who flies with whom." Alyssa exhaled. Her cheeks flushed. "But you do get to choose how you treat people, even when everyone around you chooses wrongly." In the center of the cabin, warm yellow light filtered softly through the double windows. The woman in seat 1C, the one who had pretended to read a magazine, finally spoke. "I'm sorry if we made you feel uncomfortable. But you have to understand that these seats are part of an exclusive experience, and when someone walks in who doesn't look like the usual, it throws things off balance." Ruth placed her glass down on the tray table. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. Privilege isn't in the seat, it's in the mind. A seat doesn't know who sits on it. Only people do that. From the economy cabin behind, a soft sound rang out, a child's laughter. It cut through the tension in first class like a breeze. Everyone heard it. No one said a word. Perhaps each of them was silently wondering what made the child laugh. After lunch, as the cabin lights shifted to a soft blue for rest mode, Ruth took out a letter from her suitcase. An ivory-colored envelope, inscribed in sharp, elegant handwriting. On the front, "Only open when the final flight begins." Ruth carefully opened the letter and read. Her expression remained unchanged, but her breath grew slower, deeper. The intern, sitting near the end of the economy cabin, caught a glimpse through the gap in the curtain. She didn't know who the woman was. She only felt that something about her stilled the heart. Perhaps you've once sat in a place, a luxurious room, a formal reception, or a plane like this, and felt every eye pass through you. No one asked how you were. No one believed you deserved to be there. If that feeling ever brushed against your life, don't hesitate to share. Your story isn't just a tale. It's a wound many people still hide quietly. The cabin dimmed. Most passengers had either fallen asleep or put on headphones. Ruth stayed upright. She didn't sleep, didn't close her eyes. Her fingers brushed gently against the ring on her little finger, engraved with "Never loud. Always heard." In the control room beneath the aircraft floor, a technician was monitoring the flight system. A note popped up next to a passenger's name: Delaney, Ruth. Honorary passenger. Full post-flight media rights authority. The technician froze. His eyes widened. He blinked, then typed in a quick search. And when the screen filled with hundreds of articles, images, and videos about Ruth Delaney, he stood up from his seat in disbelief. This flight didn't just carry a CEO. It was carrying a symbol. The plane glided smoothly above the clouds. The first-class cabin lay quiet, wrapped in the sleep of the privileged. Only the soft thud of wind against the windows and the faint rustle of paper from a carefully folded letter could be heard. Ruth Delaney was not asleep. She had never grown used to sleeping in places where she was treated as inconvenient. The tiny reading light above Seat 1A cast a silver glow on her dark skin. In the row behind, the young intern, Lena Morris, a graduate student in human rights, sat silently watching. She hadn't heard all the harsh words, but she had seen the looks. Every condescending glance, every smug shrug, every fake nap as the woman passed by. I've seen this in research reports, Lena thought. But this is the first time. It's happening right in front of me. Up in the business class cabin, lead flight attendant Alyssa was reading through a special encrypted passenger file. Behind her, the cockpit door was slightly ajar. The captain, a middle-aged man named Barrett, asked quietly, "You're sure it's her?" Alyssa nodded. "Yes. Ruth Delaney. The internal memo came in last night, but only senior staff had access." Barrett paused. "Does anyone else know?" "No one, especially not in the cabin, and she hasn't said a word." At that moment, Ruth picked up her fountain pen, the classic kind she always used, and wrote on the back of the letter. Each stroke in smooth black ink, curved and steady. "At 30,000 feet, I am still not higher than their prejudice." She continued, "But that doesn't matter. What matters is that I did not lower myself to meet their gaze." The lead attendant returned to Ruth's seat. This time, her bow was deeper, her voice lower. "Mrs. Delaney, I sincerely apologize for earlier." Ruth looked at her. No blame, no forgiveness. It's not your fault. The fault lies with whoever taught you to decide who deserves to be served first." Alyssa had no words. The cabin remained quiet, but the atmosphere had shifted, subtly like a breeze brushing against people's awareness before they even knew it. Ruth stood up. She didn't say anything, just stood and walked toward the back. Lena gasped as she saw the woman, the one who had been removed from seat 1A, walking straight toward her. Ruth stopped beside Lena's row. "I saw you watching, but you didn't laugh. And I saw you wanting to say something, but you didn't." Lena blushed. I wasn't sure if I should speak up. I was afraid I'd make it worse." Ruth tilted her head gently. "If everyone thinks that, then who speaks first?" Lena lowered her head, as if hearing her first real-life lesson, not in a classroom, but in the world. Ruth pulled out a slim metal badge from her pocket, the founder's ID tag from the organization Future First. Her name was engraved clearly: Ruth E. Delaney, Chairwoman. She placed it on the folding table in front of Lena. "If you're still studying human rights, then remember this. Rights don't come from law books. They come from people brave enough to defy the crowd." At the front of the cabin, murmurs began to rise. Someone had just checked the Wi-Fi and seen a breaking headline: "Ruth Delaney officially acquires 28% of Atlantic Airways shares. Founder of National Scholarship Fund becomes new chairwoman of America's largest airline." Glances shifted. The cold stares turned uncertain, then awkward. The man in the Armani suit had now seen it. He removed his sunglasses. His eyes fixated on the rear cabin, where Ruth was sitting beside Lena, talking. He leaned toward the woman next to him and whispered, "We got the wrong person." She said nothing. She just gripped her champagne glass tightly, no longer daring to take a sip. Another attendant, now aware of the situation, approached with a tense expression. She whispered to Alyssa, "Maybe we should invite her back to her seat and serve her properly." Alyssa looked toward Ruth. "I don't think she needs the seat back. She needs people to understand why they thought she didn't deserve it." The PA system came on, but this time it wasn't the captain speaking. It was a special announcement from the highest level of the airline. "We are honored to inform you that aboard this flight is a living icon of justice, fairness, and resilience. Please welcome Mrs. Ruth Delaney, the newly appointed chair of the board of Atlantic Airways." The entire cabin went silent. Some passengers slowly began to applaud. The air was strange, as if no one was sure whether to clap or bow. Ruth stood. She said nothing. She didn't return to seat 1A. She simply nodded, and turned back to sit beside Lena. She remained where no one had looked for her at first, and now no one dared look directly. Alyssa quietly returned to the crew galley. She opened her phone and typed a message. "Today, I served a legend. And I almost missed it, because I looked the wrong way." In a cabin, silent as a chapel, the woman who had once been pushed aside had turned the entire system around. Not through power, but through presence that could no longer be denied. The plane was descending. Cabin lights shifted to a soft white glow. Passengers slowly awoke from short naps, or pretended they had noticed nothing throughout the flight. But the atmosphere had changed. There was a strange stillness hanging over first class. Not from fatigue, but from the quiet realization of having been wrong, and not knowing how to make it right. The man in seat 1B, the one who had made the cold remark at the start of the flight, was now staring out the window. His hand gripped the armrest. His champagne glass sat full, untouched since he realized Ruth Delaney was not just a random elderly woman with a fancy ticket. He turned to the woman in 1C and whispered, "I should apologize." She shook her head. What good would it do now? In the back, Ruth was still speaking with Lena, the only one who hadn't looked at her with appraising eyes. They weren't talking about power or equity shares or speeches. They were talking about a free book stand in the Bronx, sponsored by Ruth, which Lena had visited as a child. "I didn't know you were the founder," Lena said. "Back then, I picked out my first ever book, A Wrinkle in Time." Ruth smiled. "I remember that shipment. I labeled every copy by hand." In the cabin, all eyes were now on Ruth, but she didn't notice. There were no more cold glances, no more sneers, only a new kind of silence, the worried kind, worried it was too late to show respect, worried that pride had stolen the chance to be forgiven. Lead flight attendant Alyssa stepped into the aisle. Her voice trembled slightly but was clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, there's something I need to say, not as staff, but as a person. I treated someone as though they didn't belong here, simply because they didn't look like the people we're used to seeing in this section. I was wrong, and I think many of us were." Silence. Then, a round of applause. Uneven, hesitant, but sincere. Ruth Delaney stood. This time she walked back to the front of the first-class cabin, but not to reclaim her seat. She stopped in front of the first row. Her gaze swept across the passengers. She didn't accuse, she didn't demand they bow. I've sat in many meetings, auditoriums, and forums where people gave beautiful speeches about equality. But here on a chair flying above the clouds, I've seen more clearly than in any document. Fairness isn't decided by law, it's shown through attitude. She looked at Alyssa, then turned to Lena and continued. "I don't need to be served champagne. I don't need an apology. I need you to remember this feeling. The feeling when you realize the person you dismissed was the very person helping you be here." The woman in seat 1C, the one who had sneered earlier, spoke. "I really don't know what to say except I'm sorry. I thought you didn't belong in that seat." Ruth nodded gently. "You're right. I don't belong in that seat." A wave of whispers passed through the cabin. "Because I don't need that seat to prove who I am. But I need those seats to open, so the ones who come after me won't be left standing at the door." Captain Barrett, who rarely left the cockpit, stepped out. He held the mic. "On behalf of Atlantic Airways, I offer our deepest apologies to Mrs. Delaney, not just for today's incident, but for all the other times we lacked the courage to examine ourselves." He bowed, and the entire cabin stood with him, in silence, like an unspoken ritual. As the plane landed and the doors opened, everyone stepped aside to let Ruth Delaney exit first, but she paused, turned to Lena. "Would you walk with me?" Lena froze. "Me? You have something not everyone does, courage without ego. I need someone like that beside me." They walked out together, not rushed, not showy, just two women, one old, one young, sharing a moment of quiet strength in a world full of judgment. At baggage claim, first-class passengers waited in line for their luggage. No one spoke, but their eyes followed Ruth from afar. Alyssa quietly handed her a piece of paper, a request for a 1-week leave of absence. Reason: to reassess personal values. Ruth nodded. A brave decision, especially when no one made you do it. Outside the gate, a young reporter was waiting. Not for Ruth, but for Captain Barrett, who once led a female pilot mentorship program. But when she saw Ruth step out, she raised her camera. Ruth looked at her and gently lowered her hand. "Don't take the photo. If you want to write about the one who sat silently, then chose to speak up. People like that deserve more recognition than I do." In the arrivals hallway, Lena asked quietly, "Aren't you angry?" Ruth smiled. for the first time, fully and gently. "I don't have time to be angry. I'm busy building chairs so those who come after won't be left waiting at the door." If you've ever been judged just for your appearance, your background, or the name on your resume, then maybe you've sat in some version of Seat 1A too. If this story brought back a memory you'd long buried, we invite you to share, not for justice, but to remind others, you are not alone. And if Ruth's journey resonated with you, follow along for what comes next. We can't promise to change the world, but we won't let any voice go unheard. 6 days later, Atlantic Airways. Boardroom, 28th floor, Central Glass Tower in New York City. A leather chair sat vacant at the head of a long conference table, facing the window overlooking the main square. No one sat in it, but no one dared pull it out either. Because everyone knew it wasn't empty, it carried presence. Ruth Delaney walked in, slow but steady. The board of directors was already waiting. No one stood up. She hadn't asked for a greeting. But all of them picked up their pens, opened their notebooks, and straightened their backs, as if the order of the room had shifted with each step she took. She sat in the chair that had once been meant for no one. Now it belonged to her, not because of a title, but because no one else deserved it more. The CEO began, voice slightly shaky. "We've received the incident report from Tuesday's flight, and we'd like to extend our formal apology." Ruth raised her hand. Gently, firmly. She didn't need to interrupt, just a gesture was enough. "I don't need a written apology, I need results." She placed a gray folder on the table. The cover read clearly, "Proposal to restructure customer experience," based on 3 principles. No assumptions, no exclusions, no consolation after disrespect. Her voice was calm. "We will not create special cabins just to avoid conflict. We will retrain all staff, from flight attendants to management, using real lived experiences. And I will be the first to teach." The silence in the boardroom wasn't uncomfortable. It was stunned. Because no one expected that the woman once removed from Seat 1A would walk into this room as if she had always been seated here before the table was even built. Ruth pointed at the large screen behind her. It displayed a video recorded by a passenger, from the moment she was asked to leave her seat to when she stood in the cabin speaking about fairness beyond legal words. The video was going viral. Hashtags like #1 Ajustice, #Delaney Effect, #The Woman in the Chair had already reached nearly 4 million shares. The head of PR scrambled to respond. "We're controlling the media narrative. Several outlets have requested interviews." Ruth raised her hand again. "We do not control this story. We have only 2 options. Learn from it, or be taught the hard way next time." A few hours later, Ruth arrived at the airline's employee training room. A small room, white walls, folding desks, a dusty projector. About 60 staff members, of various ranks, were already seated. A few whispered, "That's her." But Ruth didn't introduce herself. She stepped to the board and picked up a marker. She wrote a single line, "Who deserves Seat 1A?" Then she turned around. No one. And everyone. Because a seat doesn't determine dignity. How you treat someone in that seat, that tells the world who you are. No one blinked. A young flight attendant raised their hand. What if the passenger doesn't match the brand image? Ruth nodded. Then the problem is with the brand image. If it doesn't include everyone, it's just an image, not a brand. In the back of the room, Lena Morris stood silently. This time, she was no longer the silent intern in the cabin. She was Ruth's new special assistant, hired just the day before. After the first session, Lena asked Ruth, Why did you start from the lowest ranks? Why not begin with the board or the shareholders? Ruth smiled slightly. Because the bottom floor was where I was first pushed out. And if that isn't rebuilt, everything above it will eventually collapse. A week later, at a large auditorium in Los Angeles, the airline hosted the launch event for an initiative called the Chair Project. At the center was Seat 1A, displayed as a symbol. Not gold-plated, not premium leather, just a simple chair, with the inscription, "For anyone who was ever told they weren't enough to sit here." Thousands of guests, journalists, activists, and even former staff dismissed for discrimination were in attendance. Ruth took the stage. No slogans, no rallying cries. She said one sentence. "I was once asked to leave a chair. Now, I just want to make sure no one has to stand forever. Just because they don't look like those already seated." If you've ever entered a room and felt like you didn't belong, not because you weren't good enough, but because someone else defined enough by your face, voice, or outfit, then Seat 1A isn't just for Ruth. It's for you. And if you've ever risen above those looks, your story deserves to be heard. Leave it in the comments, not to seek sympathy, but so that those still standing outside the frame know they are not invisible. 1 month later, the front page of major newspapers read, "The seat that once forced a legend to leave now marks the beginning of an industry-wide transformation." On the 28th floor, the chair of the board's seat still sat in its usual place. Ruth didn't always sit there, but whenever it was empty, no one dared forget. A woman once sat there, and turned it into a symbol that made an entire industry look inward.